Hey channel, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Boy, do I love my job. I've got right here a brand new inbox McIntosh MC275 from the late 1990s. Now this is going to be a series 2 or a series 3. We're not quite sure and we won't know until we dive in. So let's get started. Check this out. I don't just have that MC275. We scored a total of 4 pieces, brand new in sealed box, all from the late 1990s. I've got here an MC2000, which is their most formidable tube amplifier. This is a limited edition with a matching tube set box next to it. You can see the metal straps are still on it and the tape's intact. Over here I've got an MX132, which is an audio video control center, super early video control center. This is essentially a preamplifier. And then here I've got an MA6450. I've actually never seen one of these before, especially in the sealed box. So I'm super excited to get that one open as well. Now listen, if you guys want to see an unboxing on any of these 3 additional pieces, please leave it below in the comments. Let me know which one and what order. We'll sort of take a vote and see what's next. If you're into this type of content, I encourage you to check out our videos. I'll link to a few of them below. We've got unboxing videos for brand new inbox for Marantz 8B amplifier, Marantz 10B tuner, which is the top of the line from Marantz, and also a Luxman CL35 that we actually have in stock at our store. So check those out. Also, I'm gonna put chapters below. So if you scroll forward and back, you can kind of skip the boring part. Now, if you've got a keen eye, you'll notice that this is already cracked. I've got another quick video I'll link in just right now where I actually opened it up. I had to open it up when I received it from the client just to make sure we weren't getting a box of rocks. As you can see, they're packaged very differently than they are nowadays. They do use the high density polystyrene. Nowadays, they encase the entire thing in foam. All right, so these things are super heavy and they're kind of lopsided. So whenever handling a 275, you gotta pay extra attention. Now you're gonna see me struggle a bit with this. Let's see if I can kind of tell you a bit about the MC275 while I unpack. So there were 6 versions that came out over the years. It started somewhere in the 1960s. I believe it was, I've got notes here, it was 1961 was the first MC275. And it was quite a bit of power. 75 watts was a lot of amplification power. Most amplifiers at that point were still running at 20, 30 watts. And you didn't really need a lot of horsepower because the speakers were extremely highly efficient. It wasn't until the days of solid state amplifiers that we went really far above that rating. As you can see, the inner packing is done with cardboard. And then it's got a thin sheet of plastic and some foam around the output transformers. The manual is not that different from what we would find today. I guess this has been pretty consistent. MC275, and we have no indication of exactly what version amplifier this is. The serial number points to version 2 or version 3, but we're not quite sure exactly. Now there were 6 versions, as I mentioned earlier. The version 1 was from 61 to 1970. That was a super popular era for tube amplifiers, and it really wasn't until transistors became more viable that tube amplifiers were abandoned. And that's exactly what happened in 1970. We've got a really long gap of almost 20 years between version 1 and version 2, which is what this might be. 1993 to 1998. Is version 2. So the story has it that as soon as the Cold War started, there was a real shortage of tubes. So McIntosh had to resort to sourcing tubes from other more questionable sources. We did not have access to Chinese and Russian tubes like we have today. And that's why they decided to sort of abandon the amplifier altogether. Now this is going to be an awkward lift, so I think I'm going to do this off camera so I don't look like a jerk. Holy cow, that's heavy. So version 2, which came out in 1993, was very similar to version 3. Version 2 was named the Gordon Gow edition, which was a reissue of the original 275 in the honor of Gordon Gow, who had passed away. He was one of the vice presidents at McIntosh, ran it for a bunch of time, and also was a co-founder of the technology that's in this amplifier. Now that technology was called the unity coupled circuitry, and that's what the sort of output transformers on these amplifiers and a lot of even current products from McIntosh still utilize. The two versions that are in question are version 2 and version 3, and they differ very, very slightly. It's pretty much the exact same circuitry. Version 2 would have Gordon Gow badging on the side and use a chrome chassis, while version 3 essentially would lose the badge and go to a stainless steel chassis. Now the serial number, as I mentioned before, could be either one. This is serial number 10455. We're going to find out now which version it is. Kind of hoping for the later of the two, version 3, because of this amplifier being in storage for so long. If it's the chrome version, it's likely to have some pitting, but if it's the stainless steel version, we're going to have a pristine amplifier. And again, there's really no performance difference between version 2 and version 3, or even collectability. They don't really price differently. All right, this thing is immaculate, obviously, and I suspect that's stainless steel. Let's roll this back so we can get a good look at it. So it's ironic that Gordon Gow was the gentleman that essentially terminated the production of tube amplifiers for McIntosh, and then when he died, they reissued the two amplifier, the MC275, and with his commemorative name plaque. All right, so yep, no badging. So this is in fact a Series 3. Now the output power has been the same through all the generations of 275s, and if you're not familiar, the 275 actually means that it's 2 channels at 75 watts per channel. So there's actually 2 75-watt amplifiers built into this. You could almost, except for a couple of components that are shared, including the input power supply, you could pretty much split it up. As a matter of fact, McIntosh did make a 75-watt monoblock for many, many years, which would have been essentially this thing sliced in half. So why did McIntosh reissue the 275 after a 20-some-odd year hiatus? Well, the legend has it that the Asian market in particular was clamoring for a tube amplifier, and McIntosh really wasn't that sure about it, especially because of the price point. While this was around $400, the version 1, things had really changed a lot price-wise, and to manufacture an amp and go to market would have to be, 5, 6, 7, 8 times more expensive than it was originally, and they weren't sure if there was a market for it. So they gave it a shot. So reissuing the Gordon Gow edition, testing the market and see what happened, and boy, did it catch on. It really took off at that point. Production numbers were fairly high for the next subsequent 4 versions. Now going back to why they reissued this amplifier, well, they noticed right away that the used MC275 sort of pre-owned units were selling at a great rate and fetching top dollar. And really that was a big part of why they decided to test the market. Used pieces were selling at 3 times the original price, so McIntosh said, well, let's give it a shot. Can we sell this amplifier at maybe 10x of what the original was? And because everything was made in-house, McIntosh was able to maintain really strong margins on this model. And we're talking even the transformers for input and output are all manufactured inside. So were the chassis and just about everything. I'll put a picture up now. You can see the differences between the first and the second version, but a couple of key elements. One is the design inside, and we'll take a look later. We're going to crack this baby open and see how it's built inside. But essentially, the design got simpler, specifically with the input. Gone are the twin mono slider controls and the 4 potentiometers. We're now left with a pair of gain knobs that go between 1 and 2.5 volts. We've got the addition of the balanced inputs, which is pretty much required for an amplifier, a high fidelity amplifier these days. And they went to a beefier power strip for the speaker connectors, which is also a welcome thing to be able to accept larger cables. Then they lost this octo socket that would be used to power preamplifiers and a few other things on there. So it did, this panel got a lot simpler. And of course they added the gold plated RCA jacks. A lot of things happened internally as well. It went from a purely point-to-point wiring to what's called a hybrid type of wiring, where we've got a PC board carrying a lot of the components, and then we've got some point-to-point wiring. I suspect it's for the sockets and other things. And guess what? I just noticed I don't see any tubes anywhere. I suspect this cage is going to come off. And in fact, we've got no tubes in here. So what I imagine happened back in the 1990s, this must have shipped separately with tubes in another box, which is a bummer. It would have been nice to have had a real nice set of vintage tubes to go with this, but at SkyFi Audio, we've got a huge cabinet full of tubes, and I'm sure Ben, our technician, is going to find an amazing set to go with this. Now, speaking of tubes, the fundamental design and circuitry did not change very much over the 50, 60 year span. These tubes here, the little ones, did change depending on how much gain the unit would have. And over time, even this tube here, as the amount of gain was reduced, this metal shielding protector went away. I think in series 4. So yeah, KT88, 6550s for the power, and then a combination of 12 AX7, AU7s, you name it. There's probably 4 or 5 different tubes. The 12 BH7, the AT7 were all used in different combinations. The other thing that happened is, the Cold War ended, and we finally had access to reliable tubes again. So that we're able to sort of maintain that sort of quality. Because at that point, in the 70s and 80s, you were able to bring this amplifier to a McIntosh clinic. They would host these, all over the country. And you would bring it, and if the amplifier was measuring out of spec, they would change a few tubes and get you back and running within spec. But because they had no access to good, reliable tubes, they stopped essentially, certifying or putting these through the clinic certification process. If you like this sort of content, this would be a great time, please, to like and subscribe. It keeps these videos coming your way, and it keeps us sort of motivated to bring them to you. Also, if you're in the market for any McIntosh gear, you're in the tri-state area, please consider us at SkyFiAudio.com. We're a reference platinum McIntosh dealer. We love the stuff. We know it really, really well. Now, it wasn't too long after this piece that sort of McIntosh proved that the tube market was alive and strong, that they reissued their best tube preamplifier, the C22. Now, it was a little bit more complicated or a heavy lift for them, so it took a bit of time and money for them to do it. Specifically, the switches, they were trying to stay true to the type of switches they used on the original C22, so they had to develop that, and it took a bit of time. Now, this can be used in a modern system, mostly because of the gain. Right? We've got essentially gain controls here from 1 to 2.5 volts. 2.5 volts is what is standard nowadays on McIntosh gear, so this will be a perfect match for either a vintage preamp or even something modern. Now, the new or the current C22 preamp is what would be my first choice by far. Now, let's see if I can give you a close-up. Now, it's super reflective, so it's hard to film this thing. Just about every MC275 I've seen from this era has some sort of silk screening issue where the writing has come off from either, aggressive cleaning or just time. This one obviously is absolutely impeccable. All right, looking at the features on this side, we've got the larger terminal strips. They are in fact gold plated, which is super nice. And then we've got a convenience outlet, so you could hook this up to a preamp or something like it. Now, we still have a captive power cord, as you can see here, and it is not grounded. This would be 2 more generations before we'd lose this cord. The fuse is accessible right here. And then, as mentioned before, we've got a set of really high quality gold-plated XLR inputs. We've got a set of RCA inputs also gold-plated. The manual says this reduces distortion and noise. And then the gain controls, left and right. And then these switches are pretty simple. This is to flip between mono and stereo. You are able to bridge some of the outputs. You'd have to look at the manual really careful to do that. But you could get 150 watts times 1 out of this. So if you had a pair of these, you could double the power. And then the input selector, this is essentially to select between this input and that input. For the tube complement, we've got KT88 and 6550. You can use them interchangeably for the 4 power outputs. And then on the preamplification stages, we've got 12AX7A, 12AX7, another one, 12AZ7, another AZ7, another AX7A, an AZ7, and a 12AZ7. Now here we have the only signs of long-term storage. I've got some of the plastic stuck here to the stainless steel. Because this is in fact stainless steel, we should be able to address this before we pack it back up for the next owner. So our serial number here, power output, pretty standard stuff. And then the front view without the cage in place. Now I'm being super careful not to get a single fingerprint on this. The next, or the real owner of this piece should have the same experience I'm having and not have a single blemish on it. All right, now we're gonna flip this thing over carefully and inspect the inside. Now, why do I do this? Well, it's not just for the video, but also it gives me an opportunity to sort of inspect the components, make sure there's nothing that's deteriorated or aged over time. It's sort of like a next level of, all right, so far we've covered series 1, 2, and 3. This is in fact a series 3 amplifier. There were a total of 6 of them. And within the 6 series, there were a couple of variations. Every couple of years, they would celebrate an anniversary by issuing a gold-plated version of this amplifier. I've got at least one of them in my shop in the private collection. Now the Series 6 is pretty much looks very similar. They've got some really nifty things they've added over it. They've made it safer, they've made it more reliable, they've made it more quiet. So that it's come quite a long way, but they've sort of maintained the overall circuit topology and the aesthetics, which I love. And this is what I meant earlier with point-to-point wiring or the hybrid design. We got a main PC board here containing a lot of the circuitry. These ordinarily would have been strung between 2 barrier strips, but here we have the main PC board, and then some of it is point-to-point wiring. You'll see here that all the tube sockets are attached to the chassis and then wired with these little connectors. So really nice and easy to service. And they've done the same thing with the power tube sockets and a bunch of components, at least in the power supply section, are still point-to-point. Don't really have a preference. On the new version, on 6, everything is mounted to the board. Essentially, the board has the sockets attached to it. They've done a really good job securing it, so I don't really have a preference between the 2 methods, but I know a lot of purists love point-to-point wiring. Here's a shot of the power supply section. We've got a pair of 300 microfarad, 500 volt capacitors that are branded McIntosh. I think this is the first year they did that. And then obviously all the point-to-point wiring on the inputs, volume control, and etc. See some markings throughout on the chassis. 122926 hairline FT. No idea what that means, but I'm sure there's some expert watching that is going to be able to tell us all in the comments. Please do so. Now I think it says domestic right here. I suspect that means this transformer configuration is for the US market, 120 volts. Here we've got a 1369, no idea what that is. A 633M, also no idea. And that is about it. We do have a sticker over here on the inside cautioning us not to poke around in there. It's a little late for that sticker, but sure. And also a mention of the type of fuse and the fact that it should be slow flow. Here's the back of the potentiometers. This will get shipped back to SkyFi Audio in Glen Rock, New Jersey, where Ben, our super duper tube technician, will do a much more thorough job of checking a few critical components on here, make sure it's safe and to turn on and operate, and that there's nothing that's aged. Now, while these things are fairly rare in terms of finding one that is brand new in the box, it wasn't all that uncommon for someone back in the day to purchase one of these and stick it in the closet as an investment. Certainly a lot more fun than investing in the stock market. And I suspect just about any piece from McIntosh would have outperformed the S&P especially the gold-plated stuff. A lot of the anniversary editions are incredibly coveted and sell for, 5 to 10 times the original price. Now, I'm not quite sure how we're going to price this thing out yet. I guess it'll depend if someone wants it as a collector piece the way it is, or whether they want it fully gone through and added tubes. But we'll decide that a little later, and you'll see this on our website. If you subscribe to SkyFiAudio.com, you will get an email blast on Fridays with all the new products where you can see what's come out that week. And that's my understanding of how these pieces came to us. All four of these pieces were owned by a HiFi store owner in Florida. He bought them all in the 90s, put them away, and then I think his family's in the process of finding new homes for everything, and this was the last of it.